Welcome to my lecture on creating positive futures. We want to be able to see the future, to make our choices manifest. And this is related to my book, The Quantum Shield, Protecting Your Life from Destructive Thoughts and Feelings. To understand how thoughts and feelings from inside and outside can be destructive, we want to make an analogy to quantum theory. So today I'm going to introduce you to two cats. The first cat is Schrodinger's cat, and I think you might have heard about him, particularly when it says wanted, dead or alive. And this will give us an understanding of how our dreams can be dead or alive. And then we'll talk about another cat, Schmidt's cat, which shows the power of intention. Experiments have been done that demonstrate it. So the two cats will align us with quantum theory, and then we'll explore the nature of thoughts and how they entangle with our dreams, and how to handle those thoughts to make a positive result. In addition, we'll learn that there are ways of invoking something I call the quantum shield, which is analogous to what computer scientists are doing, shielding the quantum possibilities in a computer against outside disturbances which would destroy the ability of the computer. So this analogy is just beautiful, and it's playing out in modern science. But first I want to start with a story to illustrate the power of your thinking and how it can influence your dreams. There were tornadoes in the east, a few months ago, and in Tennessee a man was called by his neighbor and told he had to get out of his house because the tornado was going to rip it apart. So he took his 12-year-old son outside underneath a tree and survived. His house was totally destroyed. Now, what if he would have listened, instead of listening to the inner voice, instead of visualizing the positive of going out under that tree, he might have visualized that he was going to get through the situation without any negative effect by staying in his home. That would have been the wrong visualization. And what kind of thoughts might have made him select the wrong visualization? Thoughts like, I'm a survivor, I'm okay, I'm going to stand in my house and I'll make my house survive too. He would have made the wrong decision, and he and his son would have died. So we see how important it is to see what possibilities exist for us and how they entangle with our thinking. So I'd like to ask you, have you ever experienced a major disaster in your life? Something that was just awful because you made the wrong choice. So think about that for a minute. And think about the visualization of the positive choice that would have prevented that disaster, as well as the negative choice that brought it about. So we want to learn how to manage our thoughts and feelings, and manage the thoughts and feelings that hit us from outside. In fact, what we need is a quantum shield against these negative thoughts and feelings from inside and out. So first, let's learn a little bit about quantum theory to get the idea of this wonderful analogy. Quantum means bundle, and basically particles, of which our bodies and the earth are made, are bundles of energy. In fact, Einstein proved that with his formula E equals mc squared. In fact, your body is made out of light in that perspective. So these bundles of energy, however, are not like baseballs. They're different because before we observe them, they exist in several or more possibilities at once. And something is very strange about that. It's sort of like the outplaying of our life has all these different possibilities. This is the analogy. And what can happen is outside or inside forces can entangle with the most positive path for our life, the most positive visualization, and destroy it, collapse it. Just like in quantum theory, there's a collapse. So in quantum theory, these possibilities and how they play out are playing out with regard to probability, right? Like it's 50-50 whether I get heads or tails by flipping this coin. And so probability actually plays out which possibility occurs. And we were talking about the two cats. So in Schrödinger's cat, right, Erwin Schrödinger, who invented quantum theory, came up with this idea that we could, in our minds, conduct an experiment. Now this is just a mind experiment. We'd never do it with a cat. He loved his cat. But what if we had a cat in a box and we had a poison gas that would be released if there were radioactive decay coming off a radioactive substance? So before we open the box, let's say the probability, like the flipping of the coin, is 50-50 as to whether the cat would be killed by that radioactive decay, producing the release of the gas, or whether it would be alive. So before we look, there are two possibilities, the bad one and the good one, just like a simplified version of the possibilities for our lives, the bad path and the good path that you were thinking about. Most physicists now believe that the best way to interpret this quantum strangeness, this probabilistic world, is to connect what happens to particles in quantum theory with what's happening in our ordinary lives. In other words, the macroscopic world, big stuff, interfering with the little stuff. And in the same sense, thoughts from outside or inside can entangle, we call it, which is interfering, right? Can entangle with our positive path and collapse it. Can actually make it impossible for us to see the best possible future for our lives. So I use this analogy of quantum entanglement, interference, in the interpretation of quantum theory called decoherence. Now it may be that my idea is more than an analogy. We know now that there are very peculiar things about our bodies, right, which relate to quantum theory. Number one is that back in the 1970s, Fritz Popp found out that our bodies were actually emitting light like a laser. So the idea is, although this isn't a laser, it gives you the idea, that light is made out of waves, and these waves are actually all flowing with the same timing. Okay? That's what a laser is about. And the only way that type of light can be created is if there's a quantum state, a macroscopic quantum state inside our cells. So all, not just human cells, but all cells of living beings emit this coherent light when they're in a state of health. And in fact, there's an interaction that goes on between living beings, even human beings and plants, which is adjudicated by these quantum states inside of cells. And there's some thought that there are structures inside the brain, right, inside the cells of the brain, called microtubules, which might outpicture that as well. But even beyond that, there are many, like Depak Chopra and others, who claim that there is a transcendent quantum consciousness. And someday we may actually have proof of such a field of infinite possibilities, as Depak calls it. The field of infinite possibilities, then, in that kind of a picture, gets reduced to maybe the particular paths, positive and negative, and if we're able to see them clearly and what's going to happen clearly ahead of time, then maybe we can make the right decisions. It's sort of like Paul Atreides, right? In the novel Dune, okay, one of the greatest science fiction novels ever, was able to see the possibilities for the future of his country, of his planet, and able to pick the ones which would keep them on a positive track. That's the idea. To be able to see these possibilities, it will be enabled by the quantum shield. So at some point in pursuing that dream, you had a choice to follow the perfect path or another one. You know, this idea of the quantum shield plays out in some experimental evidence as well. Lynn McTaggart, in her wonderful book called The Intention Experiment, I recommend it highly. It's got just thousands of experiments and the data from them. And one in particular fascinated me the most, and that was that anytime someone thinks a strong thought, right, a person nearby, even if they don't see them, right, even if they're shielded with an electromagnetic shield, will experience an impulse in their brain. However, if that person is projecting a negative thought out there, that normally would produce that impulse. But if they visualize a shield of light around them, something like white light, or a tube of light, or a ring of fire, these are three possibilities for visualizing the quantum shield. And this visualization actually stops that impulse in the receiver's brain from occurring. So they're not affected, they're not entangled, right, with that negative thought. So it's very exciting that evidence now indicates that there is such a thing called the quantum shield, right? And that visualization assists it, but visualization is only one part of the process. We now have scientific evidence, too, that a person in a healthy, peaceful, joyful state also has protection. And part of that is in the evidence of this coherent laser-like light coming off of cells. It is a protecting device. Experiments are showing us. So the entire body may be like a quantum computer. And, you know, it's like that laser light, which can only be produced by a collective state, a unified state. It may be the whole universe is unified by an energy in empty space, right? We call the 0 point energy.